departments are also worried about the job market in general, and just worried that, they'll accept students, but then when students graduate, there won't be actually any jobs for them out there. So yeah, I guess that's just like to let you know that's like where we're at, and that's something you might just need to expect if you are planning to apply to a PhD program this year. I think in general, if you're looking at MA programs, there might be more people that are accepting graduate students at the MA level because, frankly, because MA programs are often seen as like income generating for universities and departments. So I guess that's something to know. And this is all based on, so I'm in the history department here at the University of Utah, and these are just some of the conversations I've been part of in terms of our department trying to figure out what we're going to do in terms of graduate admissions this fall. And I think we didn't like come down on a hard decision. I think we are at least accepting applications from MA students and PhD students, but my sense is that we're going to accept a lot fewer. Our PhD program is not huge anyway, but I feel like we're going to accept like one or no PhD students this year. And so I know that's like a pretty bad outlook, especially if you're really planning on applying to PhD programs this year. And I guess there's not like an easy answer to like what to do about that. So it's kind of, I'm open to kind of brainstorming with you if you need that, like individually, or we can try to do that together here today. But I guess it's something to know. It's something that you might need to expect that you'll have to maybe put off your plans to go to graduate school for a year and have some kind of backup thing that you do for at least a year, or consider an MA program instead of a PhD program, or yeah. Yeah, I don't, Angela, do you want to add anything, or do folks have questions or anxieties about that in general?
A ton. But
Yeah.
so one thing that I think it was either Angela or Hoku told me to do was to reach out to the individual faculty members. And a
Yeah.
lot of times they have their own individual funding sometimes. So like I have a kind of interview with a faculty member in the geography department next week about like PhD funding. So super anxiety, but there also, there can be a little
Yeah.
bit of hope sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I think especially in disciplines outside the humanities, faculty often, are more regularly applying for outside funding and grants that do allow for funding for graduate students. So yeah, maybe what I said has more application to humanities programs in particular. But yeah, I think that's a really great point that, yeah, that's all, none of that was like to discourage you from your graduate school plans, but just so you know that that's part of the context right now. And yeah, I think we could kind of move into like how to choose graduate programs as a broader topic now. Because yeah, one of the really important things to do when you're looking at graduate programs is just, to find departments that have faculty that seem to have interests that would really align with your own research interests. So when you're looking for graduate programs, whatever your field is, you should look at a large number, at kind of as many as possible, and then like really go to their faculty web pages and look at, the kinds of publications that they've published already, or sometimes they'll have like a list of research interest or a list of classes that they teach. And that should help give you a sense of, what those faculty are interested in. And then, you know, ideally you might like, for some of the faculty that you're that seem to have the most interesting research profiles to you, you might consider trying to read a little bit of their work if you haven't already. And then, yeah, and then you can like reach out to them and kind of inquire, like Mikhail said, especially this year, it might be a good idea to inquire if their department is, well, first kind of state your interest in their graduate program and in working with them, and then kind of inquire about if their program is accepting graduate applications this year. And that's probably one of the best ways to, because a lot of some grad programs I have seen are posting it on their website that they're not accepting applications this year. But some it might be a little more unclear. So the easiest way is just to ask either the faculty member that you're interested in working with, or the every department has like a director of graduate studies. You could also email that person to ask. And I guess just the other thing I would say is that it really helps if you can identify at least like 2 faculty that you're interested in working with in any department, because faculty leave and faculty go on leaves and stuff. And so it's always better to have kind of multiple people that you can imagine yourself working with, instead of like putting all your eggs in one basket, if it's possible. Although I know it's hard sometimes, but I think maybe just as you're evaluating different departments and programs, if you see one that has like multiple faculty that you think you could work with, that's kind of probably your best fit. Yeah, I guess another way to like research and find graduate programs is to kind of identify scholars that you really like and whose work that you really like and aligns with your own interests, and kind of go back and research their biographies and see what programs they went to. Because that's, their work is often shaped by the kind of program that they went through. So that's another way to go about like finding a grad program. Yeah. I think that's what I have to say about that. Does and or Tanji, do you want to add your experiences of like choosing grad programs?
I mean, I can say, like, just to echo what you were saying, when I applied to my program, we lost, like, the year I started, we lost 3 faculty, 2 of which I had named as faculty I'd like to work with. So it was like the 3rd person that I ended up working with. So just to, yeah, that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, it happened to me too. So that's why I always try to like emphasize. I mean, it wasn't like a total disaster, but yeah, I mean, it's sad if you're going into a place like with the completely thinking that this is one person that you're going to work with for your whole graduate career. But then they leave, right? And so it's just helpful, especially if you're new to thinking about grad programs, to know that faculty do leave, or that they go on sabbaticals or things, and those things affect how much they can work with you. So, yeah. Angela, did you want to add anything or share your experience of looking at graduate programs? I know you looked at many graduate programs.
Yeah. Yeah, I was very insecure when I applied. So I applied to 14 PhDs and I ended up getting into 9. So it was too much. I don't recommend that. But yeah, I think this is something I kind of planned, or I thought we could talk about in like sort of evaluating acceptances and things like that. But
Yeah.
I would say, like, do think about where the location, you're going to potentially be there for 5 to 7 years, or at least for the first 3 until your ABD or something like that, and one of the other things that's good to think about when you're thinking about location is the proximity to other universities that you could potentially take, so like, going to a university in Southern California, there's UCLA, UC Irvine, USC, UC Riverside, UC San Diego. There's so many places, and a lot of these universities will allow you to enroll in their classes. You could have someone who works at one of those universities be on your committee too. So it's nice when you're kind of in a an area that has a lot of other, you know, sort of R1 universities that, because you're not just kind of like, you know, stuck in your one program, like how it might be in some of the like smaller college towns, you know. It's nice to, and then you also get like a greater sort of community with other people who are in grad school. Like you make friends with other grad students, you know, at other universities, which is always nice. So yeah, I would just add that, but that's also something I wouldn't necessarily say that like if your like number one favorite scholar is accepting PhD students and they're like way out in the middle of nowhere, I wouldn't necessarily say to like not apply to that just because there's no other universities. But it is just a nice thing to think about.
Yeah, thanks. What was I going to say? Yeah, I guess unlike Angela, I only applied to 3 graduate programs, and I knew nothing about the process before. And so there are many programs that I really should have applied to that I did not. So, I mean, another thing that's helpful, in addition to emailing faculty that you're interested in working with or the director of graduate programs, you can also email the graduate students at those programs that you're interested in. And I think that's actually really highly recommended because then you can ask them just like what it's like to be a graduate student in that department. And they'll often share like very honest evaluations of what that means. And that's helpful information to know too. Or yeah. And maybe I'll also just say for folks who aren't familiar with like the graduate school process, is like Angela mentioned, a committee. So often, or I mean, in almost every case, if you're an MA student or a PhD student, you're going to need to put together a committee of faculty who are kind of serve as your advisors. You'll have one main advisor, but you need to have a committee who will kind of, the other members of the committee will weigh in on your work and offer advice from their own kind of expertise. And so that's another reason why it's really helpful to look at grad programs in terms of like multiple faculty that you're interested in working with, because I think in almost every single case, you're going to need to have a committee of at least 3, like usually an MA committee is about 3 faculty, and then a PhD committee is usually 4 to 5 faculty. And the majority of those faculty will be constituted from that department. So that's another, again, that's just, you might all know that already. I didn't really know that, but again, before I went to graduate school. So that's just another reason, again, why it's important to look for multiple faculty to work with. Yeah. And then I think our next topic, do folks have any other questions on that or want to share anything else on that? Okay. Then I think, Angela, you're going to talk more about like actually putting together the components of the application, in particular the like narrative or personal statement.
Yes. Yeah, so I made a little slide. I made some slides to organize my thoughts. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Okay. Can everyone see and hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I thought we could start with just sort of the general application components. This is going to be more sort of tailored to humanities-based programs. And yeah, so if you're applying in like the sciences or like engineering or something like that, we might not necessarily, there might be other sort of things that are usually on there that we don't cover. But a lot of times, at least these things will be on there. So the first thing, OBS, is your transcripts, right? And so if you're an MA student, you're gonna need transcripts from both your undergrad and your master's institution. And if you're someone who went to different universities as an undergrad or kind of traveled around, you're gonna need transcripts from all of those places. And contrary to what like you might think, a 4.0 is not like necessary, right? Like if you had some trouble in the beginning of your college career, that's kind of like understand, that's sort of like an understandable thing. They like to see progression, right? I think the final 2 years or so is really, because that's sort of when you're focusing on your major, right? And all those classes, I think a lot of times those are sort of the grades that matter a little bit more. But again, and we'll talk about this later in the personal statement, that's something that you can kind of craft a narrative around, right? You can sort of explain some things in your personal statement and stuff like that. Also, if you're like a double major, like, so for example, I was a double major in undergrad in gender studies and business administration, business entrepreneurship. And I actually didn't have very bad grades in those classes, but if I did, I was applying for PhDs in gender studies. I don't think those would have necessarily mattered, right? Like, so if you're going for your PhD in like poli-sci, it's your poli-sci grades that will matter a little bit more than like your biology grades or something. And so the next thing is your curriculum vitae. So that's, usually shorthand for your CV. I guess a little note about this is it's not a resume, right? It's like a very kind of basic, a resume a lot of times will have some narrative in it, and a CV does not have any narrative in it. It really should not have anything other than very basic dates and things like that. And there's a lot of, I don't know, maybe Maile, if you want to add on that, I feel like there's a lot of guides online. So it's like pretty easy. And any of us would be happy to share our CVs with you all too, if you need to look. But I feel like there's a lot of guides online, so I didn't really kind of prepare a lot on this topic particularly, unless you want to add anything, Maile.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can often find people's CVs posted online. A lot of universities require its faculty to post their CVs on their faculty webpage. So one thing is the format can vary a little bit depending on your field. So it's often useful to look at the CVs of people in your particular field and then kind of model it after that.
Yeah. Okay. So after the CV, usually a lot of humanities programs require a writing sample. And so for master's students, this is usually a little bit easier because you can use like a chapter from your thesis. But for undergrads and for master's students, it really should be like a substantive research essay, if you're doing an honors thesis as a master's student or as an undergrad, then that's like definitely a good example of something to use. It should have like a strong argument, really kind of showing how you're a scholar, like who you are as a scholar. Yeah, I feel like if you're part of like we have our Pacifica undergraduates or undergrad researchers, and so part of their requirements is to do an original research sort of project. And so something like that is, I think, a really good example of a writing sample. I think you can use like seminar papers, like a long paper that you wrote with like a really strong argument, if you feel like that is one of your strongest pieces of writing. But yeah, you want to make sure that it is just like a substantive engagement with a topic that is somewhat relevant to what you want to get your PhD in. Did you have more to add on that, Maile?
No, yeah, I think you covered it. I think you're probably looking at in the range of like at least 10 pages, maybe 15 to 20 pages is often what at least humanities departments are looking for.
Right, yes. And then the next one, this is not always required and it totally depends on the university, but sometimes there is GREs that are needed. And honestly, it's just, it's your usual standardized test. I would say study, like I use little vocabulary flashcards that really helped me. Again, if you're kind of more going into humanities, the verbal matters a little bit more than your math scores. Don't freak out. I think my math was very like the most basic score you can get. Like it was not, but
mine was very, very bad. Yeah. But yeah.
Mine was probably like high school level math. So that really does not, that's not what they're looking at. They're going to look more at your writing. So it's based on 3 different things, your scores. It's like qualitative, it's like verbal and math and then writing. And the writing one is weird because it's only graded from 1 through 5. And then, but things might have changed. I did mine like almost 10 years ago. So, but, and then the verbal and the math are more like SATs, you know, like, so those are like long, where they're like 800 scores of like 700, 800, whatever, things like that. But yeah, I would say, you know, there's a ton of resources out there. Use them. I think the practice tests are really helpful, and you should use those because a lot of it is really just building your endurance, you know, because so it's a long, exhausting process. You know, the test itself, you're going to be really anxious and it's really intense, and you're in this cold room by yourself at a computer, and like, you know, it's just, yeah, it's an intense process. So building that endurance of like being in a test for 4 hours is like a good thing to do. And like any other sort of, you know, big exam or anything, like, you know, get lots of sleep, have some breakfast, you know, all that kind of stuff. Do you have anything else to add on GREs, Maile? Did you have to do them?
I did, yeah. But yeah, that was a really long time ago now. So I would say just once you've identified the programs that you're most interested in applying to, that's when you check all the components that they require for their particular application, and really check if they require GRE scores, because it takes some planning prior to the application, right? That you could study for the GRE, and that you can, you know, secure a test date. And so it just requires a little bit of prior planning. Um,
Especially,
but I would also say just that a lot of programs in the humanities in recent years have decided to not require a GRE, because they've recognized that, as with a lot of standardized tests, it 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 like facilitates the discouraging, particularly students of color, from applying or from getting in. Um, so yeah, again, you have to check each program. It's different, but a lot of programs have moved away from requiring GREs.
yeah. I feel like even when I was doing it, like some of the programs I applied to made it like very clear that they don't care about the GRE scores, but they were required for the university or something. You
Yeah,
know, like
yeah,
they were like in their sort of, you know, on their program website, they were like, we don't care about these, you know. Um,
yeah,
yeah, and I would say also, yeah, especially you want extra time, especially if you think you might want to take it again, which is, you know,
yeah.
a nice thing that you can do. You can take it again, but then, you know, it's like you have to, it's like usually like a few months out or something. So you want to make sure you have a lot of time and you're preparing for that. Okay. Tanji, did you want to add anything on GREs or writing samples or any of that so far? Okay. So then letters of recommendation, usually they require 3. Maile or Professor Arvin's going to talk about this later, but the one thing I would say is make sure you have one. If you're an MA student, make sure you have one from your undergrad too. And so your undergrad and your MA, and then just, you know, whatever. But Maile will talk more about that. And so then finally, usually it's like a personal statement or a research statement. It's called something like this. And I thought we could go more into detail with this because this is really your chance to shine, I think, you know, like it's, if you look at the rest of the things that are required, it's like numbers and like things, you know, your writing sample is a really good place to show who you are as a scholar, but it's your personal statement where you get to craft the narrative around like what all of this means, right? Um, so I would say, um, you know, this is something I really struggled with when I was first applying. I was like, am I supposed to give like my sob story? Like, I don't understand what they mean by like personal statement. And so over the years, I've realized that, you know, it's like, I think a really strong personal statement will be personal to the extent that it relates to your research, you know. If, you know, you're going to sort of include a narrative or a story about, you know, how you grew up or something like that, making sure that you do connect it directly to your research project and sort of, you know, your general goals for your PhD. Yeah, so if you want to talk about like, you know, your like a horrible car accident you were in, like that's, you know, for sure, that's like horrible. And like, you know, you grew from those challenges or something. But if it doesn't necessarily relate to your research, then like maybe no, you know. Um, so unless you're going to talk about like driving road rage or something, and that's your PhD topic or something. Um, so the one thing that is really important, I didn't do this as an undergrad. I only learned it as a master's student when I got my master's and was applying to PhDs again, was that your personal statement also needs to actually describe a research project, right? Um, so it should be sort of, you know, if you know the sort of methods you want to do, include that. It should be just like a solid sort of like, you know, substantive like paragraph on like what you're going to do in your PhD. And it's not at all, it's not expected really that that is what's, you know, it's expected that as you go into your PhD and as you go along, it will change because you'll be taking courses, you'll be growing and learning. And so it will, you know, your actual PhD project will change. But you want to have something kind of solid to start off with, like a solid idea. Um, and then you want to be sure either in this area or later on when you talk about why that specific university, you want to name specific faculty that you would work with who have expertise on this area, not just some, you know, faculty who looks really cool. Like, you know, you can, but it's like if they have research interests um, on your topic, then you want to, you know, make sure you name those people. Okay, I'll just keep going and then Maile and Tanji, you guys can add in at the end. Does that sound good? Okay. So then the next sort of section you want to have is listing any relevant research experience, right? So being part of the Pacific Islander undergraduate researcher program, like that's a great sort of example of research experience you have. If you're a master's student, if you've taught, any teaching experience, the classes you've taught, you want to list that kind of stuff, conferences you've presented at. Publications is not really expected at all, but of course it looks good. And if you have something in the works, then definitely list it in that section, right? Yeah, so let's see the next. Okay, yeah, so then towards the end it could be the conclusion or whatever. You just at some point, it actually doesn't matter the order, but at some point you want to explain why that specific program and that university as a whole is the great fit for you, right? So whether that might be where you list your faculty, the people that you want to work with, you might list other programs they have, you know, like, oh, the like museum curatorial program that you have would be perfect for my, you know, like other little things. This is where you're kind of showing that you did your research, right, on that university and that program. And then one of the things I always did was sort of connect it to the community because that was like important to me. And so where that place is, like, you know, I would love to work with the specific indigenous communities in those areas, or, you know, there's a huge Pacific Islander diaspora in that area that, you know, I would love to work with in my research or in my blah, 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 you know, things like that, talking about the student body, stuff like that. And then my final sort of little like tip is, because this is really like the only place in the application really where you get to kind of craft this narrative, like, you know, make sure you do stand out, because a lot of times, well, this was the advice that was given to me, like, you know, some of these places they're going to be reading like 50 to 100 or over 100 applications, and you want to make sure that yours kind of stands out, right? So I would say use an attention grabber in the beginning, right? Something that kind of stands out, not just like I am applying to this PhD in da da da. You know, like you do something that kind of stands out. And then if you are going to do that, make sure that it's not just some like, whoa, you know, and then it stands alone. You want to make sure it like ties back at the end, right? So an example, I screenshotted an example. So this is how I started my personal statements. So as you can see, it's not like a normal sort of start, right? So I started with, I'm from the Wito clan, And so I started with my clan sort of, it's like a saying that my clan does, right? It's an adage. So it's Wito Wito Ese Pulu 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 Chak Ikalanga Pulu. And it means the Wito will not be defeated. Defeat is only when the sky falls. So then, you know, that's my attention grabber, like, ooh, what, you know? And so then, you know, and then in that first paragraph, that's sort of, this was where I did my sort of personal narrative, right? I'm like, this is my clan's adage. However, you know, and it's this really powerful thing, but because of sort of colonial influences and, you know, all these horrible things, I was like, you know, the sky seems to be getting closer and closer to the ground for my people. And then I connect that into like the research project that I wanted to do, right? And then at the very end, I ended it by connecting back to this, right? So I was like, you know, thank you very much for your consideration or whatever. I don't remember how I ended it, but it was something like, you know, my ultimate hope is that I can, you know, not something, you know, something with my clan and just connecting back to this, right? So this is just an example of how you can, like, you know, grab the attention and sort of craft that narrative and connect that personal story into your actual research project. And so, yeah, so sort of, you know, to tie it all back, sort of the kind of breakdown is, you know, you're having this introduction slash personal connection in the beginning, and then you, for like the majority of it, and it should start on the first page, is your research project. Like that's a big component of it. And then you want a paragraph on your research experience, and then you want another paragraph on, or, you know, concluding paragraph or something on why that university, being specific to that place. And then, you know, if you kind of do the personal connection, make sure you tie back to it. Don't just sort of leave it hanging there, right? Make sure it's something that comes back. And so I would say these don't necessarily have to all be in that order, but I would say introduction and research project should definitely be first page. And then the other three, or like research experience and why that university, those are kind of, you know, you can, and there's like other paragraphs. This is sort of the breakdown that I received in my training as like a McNair scholar and as in my MA program, but you know, there might be other things and this might not, and it depends on the program, right? They might want specific things they might want to hear specific things from you. And a lot of times they'll include that on the program description or on the application description, what they want to see in your personal statement. But a lot of times these are kind of like the main bullet, the main kind of things you want to hit. But yeah, that's sort of what I have for that. Maile and Tanji, do you want to add to personal statement or to any of the other, these parts of the personal statement?
Yeah, I think that's such a great description for the personal statement. Thank you. Yeah, I love your opening.
Thanks. Tanji, you want to add anything?
I mean, I think you covered anything I would say. So yeah.
Okay. Okay, but then, so now I think we have, I'll stop sharing because then we're going to talk a little bit about letters of recommendation, and then we'll go into like when you get your acceptances, how to sort of evaluate those things. Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, I can say a little bit more about letters of recommendation. So, yeah, I guess like Angela said, you usually need about two or three letters of recommendation. Again, it depends on the application, so you really have to look at the details of each department that you're applying to. But the people you want to ask for those are, if you're still an undergraduate, then kind of the faculty that you've worked with most closely, or the classes that you've kind of excelled at the most, and that, you know, the faculty kind of knows you pretty well, like knows your work pretty well, and is able to speak to that in the letter. And so, yeah, I think it shouldn't just be like any faculty that you think is like a nice person and will write you a nice letter. It should be someone who like knows you like fairly well, is able to speak to your research and your research interests, and kind of your, when faculty are evaluating applications, they're really looking for letters that from other faculty that kind of assure them that the students' interests are like real and serious, and that they're capable of completing the kind of work that that graduate program will ask them to do, or yeah. And so yeah, I think, and I know I say all that knowing that sometimes it's hard to like get to know faculty, especially as an undergraduate, um, but kind of knowing that this is, if you are going to graduate school, and knowing that that your letters of recommendation are actually a really important part of your applications. And so that's another thing, just like with your GREs, you kind of have to schedule it out. If you're interested in applying to graduate school, you have to kind of think about your letter writers ahead of time, and kind of, if you don't have the close relationships with faculty yet, you kind of have to plan for that and work on that before, like kind of well before whenever your letters would be due. Yeah, and what else? In terms of like actually asking a faculty member to write a letter for you, I would just say to err on the more formal side. You can email them and ask them, but like treat it as like a very like formal request and not an informal one, because you are, it is kind of a significant amount of work that you're asking the faculty member to do, especially if they haven't written a letter for you before. So treat it formally in the sense of kind of the language that you use in writing the email, but also give that faculty member like a very good amount of time before the actual letter is due. Like ask them well in advance, because faculty, especially around these deadlines for graduate school, they're writing a lot of different letters, and you don't want them to like be rushed on your letter, right? And I guess you should also be prepared that faculty can say no, even if they really like you, even if they know you well, simply because they might have like too many other letters to write. And so asking them early increases your chances that they'll actually be able to write for you, and that they'll be able to write an actually good, substantive letter. What else? I think those are the main things I would say about asking for letters of rec. I think, again, in the email, kind of tend towards the more formal side, and include as much information in the ask as you can. So if you know what programs you're going to apply to already, you can kind of list those in the email that you're asking the faculty member to write for you, and also list the deadlines. And you should also kind of be prepared to share drafts of your application that you're turning into that department, to whatever departments you're applying to, so that, and that helps the faculty make sure that their letter is kind of aligned with what you're saying in your personal statement about what your research interests are. And so as much information as you can give the faculty, and as early, that's what's going to really help get you like very strong letters of recommendation. Yeah. Do other folks want to add anything about that?
I was told to also bug the faculty members, like over time, like remind them. And I had to. I was scared to, because I'm not really good at asking for things, especially from people in authority. But I had to remind some of my letter writers multiple times, and they actually thanked me for it. So just adding that part in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some faculty will even tell you, when they agree to write for you, that they appreciate reminders. But certainly, again, because a lot of faculty are writing for multiple students, for multiple different programs that all have different deadlines, it's never a bad idea to send them a reminder, at least like one reminder a week before, or like a reminder a day before. Because, yeah, faculty are flawed, complex people that often forget things. So that it does help to send reminders. Absolutely. Yeah. Any other points on that, or questions on that? Cool. let's see, what did we have next? Oh yeah, I think next, Angela, you're going to talk some about just, so you've submitted all the stuff for your applications, and now you're at the exciting point where you're getting acceptance letters. So what do you do then, especially if you have like multiple programs that you're trying to decide between?
Yes, yeah. If you have the horrible problem I had where you have to choose between 9 different programs. I think honestly, the most important thing that will give you a sense of if you feel like this is the right fit is going on the visit. Usually, so how it works is usually a program, if you're accepted, they will pay to send you out to visit that program, usually over like 2 days or so. And you'll meet with graduate students, you'll meet with the faculty that you were interested in. They'll put you up in a hotel, you know, like, it really kind of, you know, they're really different, and then it totally depends. Like some are like, oh my god, party central, and like like that's how one of them was for me, and we were like, oh my god, we got like, it was, they took us out to the bars and it was like out of control. So they can be really fun, you know. And I think that there's such a good indicator of like the vibe of the program, right? Like you get a sense of the vibe. You know, you'll get to see sort of the main office where, you know, where you would have your office hours when you're teaching, like where all the graduate students hang out, you know, like, and then you get to meet the grad students. Another thing other than meeting the grad students is you get to meet people who would potentially be in your cohort, which is also important because those are the people, that's going to be your support network, you know, like those are your buddies, like lifelong friends usually, hopefully, if everything goes right. You know, through the whole rest of your program, like 5 to 7 years, you know. So that's always really important, but don't necessarily don't like prioritize the potential cohort the most, because not all those people are going to accept, you know, like some of them might not go to that specific program. They might go to a different one, like the party school one. Like we had an amazing potential cohort, and like we were all gay and we all loved each other. We like had the most fun, and we were like, oh my god, this is like the best cohort ever, but none of us ended up accepting, you know. So we were really sad, but we've all remained friends, and some of the people are now my best friends from that visit, you know. So yeah, don't totally, you know, base your decision on that, but they'll also set up meetings with your faculty, so, or potential faculty that you're going to work with. So that's really important, you know. And you kind of get a sense of how interested they are in your project, I think, through the visit, you know. Like if you go on a visit, like one of the visits I went on, I didn't know why they were making me meet with certain people. I didn't have anything to talk about with some of these people. I had nothing in common with them. And that's like a very obvious sign that this is not a good fit, right? Like that's like, okay, I probably shouldn't have applied to this program, you know, like it's just not, that's not a good fit at all. But yeah, so I feel like the visit is super important. I think a red flag is if they don't have a visit, or if they have a visit, but they are making you pay for it, or, you know, something, it's not very organized or something. Obviously things might be a little bit different now with COVID. I don't know, you know, like if traveling, you know, things this year might be really different. But if they don't offer a visit and they're just like, yeah, you can come whenever you want and check it out and we'd be happy to meet with you, but like they don't pay for it, they don't do any of that, that's kind of a red flag, right? That's like, okay, well, where else are there potential, like either funding issues, or where else is there, you know, something going on?
I would just add in there on the visit, it's really important to talk to the current graduate students and just to get their sense of what the program is like. Again, you can kind of email grad students when you're applying and try to get some sense that way. But during the visit is when you actually get like more FaceTime with them. And so it's important to try to get a sense of what they've liked about the program, what they don't like. And also it's a chance to ask particular people who are being mentored or advised by the people that you hope to be mentored or advised by, and ask them. So you can ask the graduate students, like, what is it like to work with this person? Like, what is their style of working with you? And that's really important information, especially if you don't know the scholar that you're applying to work with. like even from knowing their work really well, that doesn't necessarily mean you know like what their personality is or their working style. And faculty have wide range of styles and how they work with graduate students. And so it really helps to talk to other graduate students to get a sense of what is it really like to work with this person, and then from that information try to gauge if that is a good fit for you or not. Oh, Angela, I think you're breaking up a little bit, but yeah, that's all I wanted to interject. But you can continue. You're going to talk more about funding, right?
Yes, yeah. Is I got a little thing saying my connection is unstable, but is it like okay right now?
Yeah, I think you're kind of back.
Okay,
Yeah.
a little bit. Just let me know. Just be like, this is not working if something happens. Yeah, that's super important. What Maile said, a lot of times they will be the ones who will like give you the real, especially in person, they'll give you like the lowdown on like, oh my God, this is an abusive advisor, or like, or something, whatever. Ideally that doesn't happen, but it does sometimes. And then you also get like, you get the tea on like what else is going on. Like on one of my visits, talking to a current grad student there who was working with the person I wanted to work with, that's how I found out that that professor was actually leaving, right? So then I was like, oh, okay, if they're leaving, like they've been on the market for 2 years now, they're leaving, they're going to go to Chicago, like they don't like it here anymore. So it's like, oh, okay, good, I won't come here, like, because that's who I wanted to work with. So yeah, definitely talk to the current grad students. The huge, other than sort of the vibe and all of that, the biggest thing I think is funding. You want to make sure it's a fully funded program, that they have, however long, ideally 5 years of full funding or funding opportunities for you, whether that's teaching or fellowships. It's you want to ask and make sure that they have opportunities for applying for fellowships where you'll be able to have writing years, right? So like especially once you're ABD, so after you take your exams in your third year, usually that ABD is all but dissertation, right? And so that's when you're just writing, you're just working on your dissertation, that's all that's expected of you. But your funding is primarily going to come from teaching opportunities or fellowships, and that's like the main way that you're going to get money. And you want to make sure that there's at least one opportunity for a writing year where you can finish, like, so at UCLA, they had this program called the DYF, which is the Dissertation Year Fellowship. And every department could nominate one, so it's like a hard thing, but every department could nominate one of their grad students, or like they would give an order of their grad students, and then the university would decide and give a full year fellowship to one person from each department. So something like that, you want to make sure that there are opportunities for that, because if all the funding is coming from teaching, that's like a lot of work, right? And that's really intense. And especially when you're expected to be teaching your own classes, like it's just a lot of work, and it's really hard to finish your dissertation during that time. It's hard to finish your dissertation period. It's even harder to finish when you're teaching for, paying to be able to pay your rent, right? And I would also say, see if there are summer funding, ask about that, if that's something that they offer at least for the first few years before your ABD, because usually once you're ABD, you're able to teach your own classes on your own. And so once you're ABD and teaching, then they will offer, or sometimes hopefully they will offer you summer teaching opportunities. And so you can, make money that way. But usually, and a lot of times, the summer is not funded. And so that's like a horrible wake up call for some people where they're like, oh, wow, I guess I need to like apply to be a barista. Or like a lot of people in LA would be caterers for like fancy parties and stuff, But you want to make sure that you have something going on for the summer. I think it's best if the first 2 years they offer summer funding, because that's when you're not able to teach, so you want to be able to have something for that summer. So that's really important. And then I think the final sort of thing I wanted to mention is, oh yeah, well, you know, thinking about location and proximity to other universities, like I mentioned earlier, that's going to become even more important when you get accepted, right? Thinking about the community there, the people, other universities there, all that kind of stuff. And then the final thing that you should know is that you can negotiate your funding package, right? So if you apply to another program or other programs who are offering you better funding, like say they're like, this is a 5-year fully funded package, we're going to give you all the summer funding for all 5 years, like it's this incredible opportunity, right? But you like program X better, you know, like that's the better fit for you, you can negotiate. Obviously, you have to be extremely tactful with this, right? Really, you know, don't name the other program, just kind of be like, and really emphasize how much, you know, and only do it if you are 100% going to go to that program. Hey, Hoku. You know, so I would not, you know, if you're just trying to like get all the offers and get all the money, don't do that. Only negotiate if you know that this program X is the one you want to be at, but you want that extra year of funding or something, you know. And so just be really vague, kind of break down, be like, I have another offer from another university. It looks like this, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. Is there any way we could potentially, again, this is my #1 program, I want to be here, you know, just sort of frame it as like, I just want to make sure I have the support that I need to be successful, right? So just kind of frame it that way, not like I'm a money hungry person or something, right? Just like I need this, you know, I want to make sure, you know, my advisors in my MA were like, don't say like, but I am like that, where I'm like, if it's a problem, no worries, you know, like no worries. But my advisors were like, don't say that, be hardball. And I'm like, no, I'm so scared. So it's a scary process. But, you know, usually that's something you'll do with the chair of the department and maybe the, what's it called? Like the office admin main person who handles the budgets and stuff like that. But yeah, I feel like, do you guys have anything else? Let me look if I added anything.
Yeah, I think we're almost out of time. And I know Dr. Aikau is joining us to talk more about research skills and stuff. But yeah, we'd love to hear Kalei or Makayo if you have any questions, or Tanji if you wanted to add anything that we didn't get to.
Could we get an example of kind of how to navigate that conversation, especially with COVID and the economics of everything? Because then, yeah, that feels like a really sorry, I can't talk today. It feels like a really hard conversation to have already, and then kind of having this conversation where it's, you know, either we get accepted into these programs or, you know, we work as baristas until we can try again. So I kind of feel like we don't have leverage for that almost, right? At least right now.
Yeah, I mean, that might be true to some extent, unfortunately. And not everyone applies to as many grad programs as Angela did. And so often you do kind of need leverage, unfortunately, to negotiate a graduate package. You do have to be able to say, well, in this other, you know, offer, they're offering this. So could you like get closer to this offer?
Yeah,
And yeah, I mean,
if you don't have another offer, like don't make up another offer, right? Like that's
yeah. It's very important not to lie about other offers, because even if you think people don't know, like
we talk.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, and I mean, it's hard for us to say really about in this current climate, right? Because this is not the climate that we experience all this ourselves. But I just would say that it's important to like lean on your advisors, and like your current advisors, like maybe the people that wrote you letters and stuff, or even us here. You can ask us and our other faculty advice if you get to that point where you're trying to decide between different programs. And if you do have different offer letters, then you can ask us how to like word an email that would be asking for like asking to negotiate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, yeah, what Miley said, I think it's just, yeah, really make sure that you're working with another like an advisor. And so like, work with Hoku, or so like work with them in frame, don't send it without sort of them looking at it also. And then talking to your advisors, they might know like, oh, that's like, that place is not going to be able to offer you more, or like, or like whatever. But yeah, in this climate, I mean, I would, if you do get to that point in this climate, I think the way to frame it would just be acknowledging that it is a really difficult time because of COVID and the pandemic. And you totally understand that funds might be really tight. However, you're just trying to make sure you have the support that you need, like just kind of, and ideally, hopefully, I don't think that they would like necessarily rescind an offer or anything. And that's what I was always scared of, which is why I always added it in at the end. Like, if you can't do that, no worries, right? Like, I still want to be here. It's my number one choice. Don't worry about matching. But yeah, just saying like, if you can get closer, the way like Professor Arvin framed it, that's a good way of doing it too, is being like, is there any way we could get close to this, right? Like I negotiated mine and it was successful, right? So I was able to get a second year of summer funding and some other things. So it's possible, but yeah, it's just, make sure you're really working closely with the faculty person.
And then also kind of along that same line, so a lot of the professors that I have for my classes, they sign their emails with their first names. So I've always never truly understood that Google never really could help me out with it. So when the teacher signs with their first name, or actually when I'm talking to any of you actually, um, and they sign their first name, does that give me permission to use their first name when I reply to the email, or is there like some power dynamic thingy, or?
I guess, I mean, I would say you are welcome to use my first name, but and in my practice, yeah, if I'm signing my first name, then it's okay to call me by my first name, but it probably varies a bit by faculty, and sometimes they might sign their first name just because they forget, or so I think it behooves you to like err on the more formal side, especially when you're going through the application process. Particularly, it might be different when you actually become a graduate student, and then you can kind of get a sense of that from other graduate students and just the culture of the program that you go into. But I think it's never bad to err on the more formal side, and then faculty can let you know, like, oh, you can call me by my first name. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say always start with like as formal as possible, doctor, blah, 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 right? And then, yeah, keep going with that. But if they keep signing with their first name over and over, like Scott, then I'm finally like, okay, thank you, Scott,
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, yeah, especially I think sometimes like emails that I get from graduate students tend towards the more informal if they're also Pacific Islander or Native Hawaiian. And I mean, that doesn't make me like think very badly of that person or anything, um, but again, like, especially if you don't know someone, it shows respect to use their title, right? And so people appreciate that, at least starting out, to use their proper title.
We can't hear you, Miley. Were you speaking? You were on mute. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just said I have to go to a different meeting soon, but does Kalei or Tanji, did you want to add anything or have any other questions before we move on? Okay, well, thank you all. Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks so Yeah.
Thank you all.
So now our